Chris Valentino. We have a 252 unit deal in Tallahassee, Florida. So for anybody unfamiliar with the tool, we use the syndicated deal analyzer for the underwriting in these sessions. And you'll notice there's certain fields that are in blue and certain fields in black. The ones in blue are designed to be edited. The ones in black have formulas in them. You could override whatever's in black, but if you do that, just understand that it may change the formula, not just the formula you see on the screen, but it may also change the formula on a different worksheet that you don't even realize until you're a few sheets in and you realize something's not adding up properly. So moral of the story is, if you're new, stick with blue. And eventually as you get more comfortable, you could always adjust if you need to. So on the income side, we're going to be looking at gross potential rent, vacancy, concessions, loss to lease bad debt, and other income. So for anybody who's been on a few of these, what's the difference in time frame with how we look at the income and the expenses, and why do we do it that way?
I'll take a try. The expenses are based off of the most recent 3 months annualized.
Close.
I think we're going to go in reverse.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, so you have the right concept, Alicia, but inverted the actual answer. But yes, as Derek's point, so it's the income that you take those last 3 months and you annualize, and then the expenses you do a T12. Why do we do it that way?
Because that's how the lender is going to do it.
Right.
Attempting to get as close as possible to them.
Exactly. Yep. And why do lenders annualize income but not expenses? Does anybody want to guess what the difference is between the two? What's the difference with income and expenses? Why would it be okay to annualize one but not the other?
I mean, the income could change because the rents were increased. So it's good to take the last 3 months so that they can get the increased rents or whatever the recent. And expenses might be fully,
Sometimes expenses, they have lump sums like the property tax and insurance.
Yep. So both you guys are right. I would agree with both accounts, because the thing is, you're right. So income is consistent. You usually have the same line items every month. So what's happened in the last 1, 2, 3 months is a lot more relevant than what happened 9 and 10 months ago. But as Gene said, sometimes on the expenses, you may see certain things that are only paid once or twice a year. So if you took the last 3 months of expenses and your property taxes were paid 6 months ago, and that was the only payment you had for the year, then your numbers are going to be very skewed. So that's generally why you see it done that way. Okay, so what we'll do here is we'll take all of our income items and we'll just take a moment to annualize these. So in this case, our last 3 months is September, October, November. And we're just going to take a subtotal of those three. And after we do that, we're going to multiply that subtotal by 4. Does everybody understand why we're multiplying that subtotal by 4?
To annualize that.
Right. So keep in mind, guys, if you don't multiply this by 4, your total is going to be very, very skewed. So you have to multiply by 4. Otherwise, you're going to come up with the wrong answer on that. Okay, so for a really high level, what do we see on the income as we look at the T12 basis versus the T3 annualized basis? What trends are we seeing in pretty much almost all line items? If we look at the numbers in column O versus column P, what's happening there? Anything else?
They're increasing.
Right. So is that a trend that you want to see as you're getting ready to buy a property? Do you want to see these numbers increasing?
Yes, hopefully.
Yes. Okay, so those are good trends. Okay, so the T3 annualized numbers with almost all of the income items are considerably stronger. So let's take a peek here and let's come over to our account name so you can see which item or items are going to be in our gross potential rent. Row 10, yep, very good. Okay, so our total there is $4,244,400. Okay, so next thing we have is physical vacancy. Who wants to explain the difference between physical and economic vacancy?
Mr. Derry, your physical vacancy is a unit that's ready for the market, but for whatever reason it's now rented, versus economic, where the place is occupied, but either the tenant's not paying or maybe it's being used for display, or maybe it's you have someone living in there, like a worker living there or something like that.
Right, good answer. That sums it up pretty well. So on the physical vacancy, which item or items are we gonna plug into that?
11,
Which one?
11.
Not 11, nope, we'll put that with our economic vacancy.
21.
21.
Right, 21, good. Okay, so that one where it says vacancy lost, that's going to be our physical vacancy. Okay, so 246, 455, 64. So right away, without even going any further, let's take a minute. There's a couple of things that jumped out at me right away with these numbers. But does this property have a story to it? What are we seeing here right away with this one line item?
The vacancy decreasing? The
It
vacancy loss?
is. It certainly is decreasing by massive amounts. It was quite sizable at one point. So, and at one point, we also had another item very sizable, which is down units. So does this property obviously have some type of story to it?
Yeah, it looks like they did a big lease up.
Yeah, it looks like that is. So what do we need to do as we're looking at this property? What's one of the things we need to find out?
Why?
Right.
The down unit sounds like either they were doing a lot of renovations or, what happened basically.
Yeah. So why is that important, Derek? So what's the importance of understanding the story with the vacancy and the down units here?
Well, I would think that's going to let us know where the trends is basically going, right?
Right. So we also want to be able to get ahead of any problems that we may be able to uncover with questions like that. Because maybe there's a reason, maybe there was a massive fire that took out a tremendous number of units. But those are, whatever the reason is, we want to find out, because between those two numbers at $140,000 a month on a $320,000 rent roll, that's pretty high. It's not quite 50%, but it's just a smidgen shy of that. So probably good to understand what happened here. Okay, so next thing we have is concessions, loss to lease, bad debt, which is all of our different types of economic vacancies. So which item or items from the T12 are we going to plug in there?
11,
Yep. What else?
15
Mhm.
through 20.
Very good. Okay, so we'll take all those items and we'll total them up. Okay, so our total there is 418, 430, 432. Okay, so between both, we're, north of 15.5% now, but obviously a lot better than where the property was just a few months ago. Okay, so now we have other income. So what falls into other income?
Laundry, parking and stuff.
Yep,
Pet fees.
yep,
Everything outside of rent.
very good.
And rental loss.
Okay, so good. We'll take all these items here. We're going to take a total of each of these items and we'll plug those into our other income. Okay, so we have 178, 984.08. Okay, so let's total up our numbers and just make sure everything proves out. So in the syndicated deal analyzer for effective gross income, we show 3,758,494. And on the T12, we're showing the same thing. So keep in mind, guys, you have to make sure your numbers prove out. If your numbers don't prove out, you need to take a few minutes and find out where that difference is coming from. So there are times where, if there's a couple of dollars here and there, it's probably not a big deal. But if it's a sizable difference, like a 6-figure difference, you need to spend a few minutes and go back and just see where that mistake is, because that could be something that could really impact your underwriting. Okay, so now we're going to go through the expenses. So on the expense side, items we're focusing on here are advertising, contract services, gas and electric, general admin, insurance, legal, real estate taxes, trash removal, management fee, payroll, repairs and maintenance, turnover, and water sewer. So everything we see in the T12 is going to fall into one of these line items. Okay, so the first category they're giving us here, they're saying is general administrative. Is there anything here that you might consider breaking? Is there anything here you might consider breaking out?
I think I see on the bottom 72, they have property management fees. Why is that there? Although
Yeah.
that looks pretty low, but
Yeah, so that one we can definitely break out. That's gonna have its own line item, so we'll take that. That's 75,762. Is there anything else that we break out, or would you guys leave everything else in that general and admin category? Okay, so the rest of them we'll leave in there.
Yeah, leave in
So- Okay, so our total there is 63,297.23. Okay, so next thing we have is payroll and benefits. Do you guys agree with these are all payroll items?
yes.
Yep, so would I. And our total there is 338,761.63. Okay, so then we have contract services. What is a contract service? Let's start with that. Who wants to explain what that is?
Things that are not done by in-house people.
In part, but there's a little more to it than that, because there could be some things that you outsource that wouldn't necessarily be a contract service.
Expenses that have consistency in use and cost.
Right. So your most common ones are landscaping and pest control. If you're in an area that has snow, you may see snow removal usually put in there also. And then you may have some other little odds and ends, but those are your more common ones. Is there anything here we would break out?
I see they have trash, but we do have a separate line item on the.
Right, so those
For
last two
trash.
items for trash removal and valet trash, I'm gonna break out and put in our trash removal cost. That's 53,516.07. Now, keep in mind, guys, if you were using a different underwriting tool and they didn't have a separate line item for trash, you could actually put that with contract services. I've seen people put it with utilities also. I personally don't consider trash a utility, but each their own. So it'll depend on the tool you're using and what options you have there. Okay, so how about the rest of these items? Alarm monitoring, where would you guys put that?
Oh, okay. I raised my hand to ask a question. Now
Okay, sure, go for it.
Okay. So, line 98.
Line 8.
This courtesy officer, there's no charges until July. So does that mean that he started, he or she's, there's more. Okay, sorry, I couldn't see the rest of it.
So it looks like there is kind of some consistency from July. It's probably something they didn't have beforehand. But based on the consistency and kind of the similarity in amounts month to month after that, I'd be okay with leaving that as a contract service.
Thank you. I couldn't see the rest of the month.
Yeah, that makes sense because it's a little bit bigger than usual. Okay, so would you guys break any of these items out, or is there anything that you would, would you put these all as contract services?
What is valet trash, please, Charles?
Absolutely. It's an interesting service. I consider it one of the biggest ripoffs in multifamily, but it seems to become more and more popular. So basically what it is you're using a third-party service to collect trash from each of the apartments. So that way the tenants don't need to dispose of their own trash and go to a dumpster or a trash room. They basically put their garbage bin outside when they want service, and the third-party company comes, they pick it up, they empty the trash bin, and just bring it to the dumpster or the trash room on the property so the tenant doesn't have to walk to it.
Well, wouldn't that then be income if you're charging a tenant for it?
Well, in this case, it would be an expense, but they probably do have an income item that offsets it. So let's see.
Okay, got it.
So down here, or up here, I should say, they are charging
yes.
income as well. So it looks like right now they're bringing in $25,000, but what's happened is it looks like something they've implemented pretty recently because they didn't have any charge at all before the beginning of 2022. And it looks like each month they're increasing it a little bit because what's happening is some of their existing leases are expiring. So as they're renewing leases and signing new ones, they probably have that fee built into it. And now all new tenants are receiving that charge.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So in this case, it looks like they did profit about $11,000 on it, with the T12 basis. And that number will probably grow in future years as they have more and more tenants on it. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll take our top 2 line items. I'm going to lump these into general admin. And the reason I'm doing that is because these are really more monitoring services. So they're monitoring for different types of security. And a lot of times, usually that's considered stuff that's more business of the property than an actual contract service. So because of that, anything that's related to running the business of the property, you're going to put in general admin. Okay, then our next one here, key tracking system. It's tough to tell exactly what this is, but based on the infrequency and the amounts, I'm guessing that's probably some type of repair item. So I'm going to just throw that in our repair and maintenance total. So keep in mind, guys, some things will be a judgment call. There'll be some things that are black and white and some things that are gray. Use the best judgment you can because you only have limited information. And don't spend a ton of time on a $400 line item. A $400 line item on a multi-million-dollar purchase is probably not going to make that big of a difference in the big picture of things. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so our next items here for landscaping, pest control, security, patrol officer, those are we're going to put as a contract service. And I'm actually okay putting the pool there too. It does seem, consistent to a point. It seems they're somewhere in that $13.75 a month range, and there's some months where it does fluctuate, but I think, if you notice, these equal $27.50, so that's just $13.75 times 2. So it's probably just the way they accounted for it more than anything else, that there does seem to be some consistency. Okay, so our total there is $116,967.72. Okay, so then the next category we have here is repairs and maintenance. And do you guys agree that these are all repair and maintenance items? Oop.
That looks good to me.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. And let's just go all the way down, which is not too much more. So we'll put this total in our repair and maintenance total. That's $40,180.37. Okay, so next thing we have is make ready. So make ready, turnover, kind of the same thing. Do you guys agree these are all make ready or turnover line items? Yep, so would I. So we'll take our total there, which is $27,775.66. Okay, so next thing we have is marketing. And do you guys agree that these are all marketing or advertising expenses?
Yep.
Yep, so would I. So we'll take our total there, which is $49,740.08. And communication, cable and internet for the office. Where would you guys put those?
General and admin?
Yep, why?
Not the expense.
Right. So keep in mind, guys, anything for the office, that's going to go in your general admin expense. Okay, utilities, our first 3 line items, we're going to put these in our electric and gas total. And that's $102,473.96. And our next three are water and sewer. And that's 97, 566, 95. Kind of a rarity, but the electric and gas is higher than the water sewer. Don't see that too often. Okay, and then we have utility billing fee. Where would you guys put that? Anybody have any thought?
I mean, either I will add it to the general admin, or I'll just add it to the utilities portion.
Yeah. So in this case, I'm gonna throw it in general admin just because there's separate line items in this for each of the utilities. But if you're using a different tool that has the utilities kind of all lumped together, I'd probably just put it in there. So the utility processing fee is usually something that usually for a third-party billing service. So most times you're paying that, and oftentimes it gets billed back to the tenants. So our next items pertain to property tax. So we're going to put that in our tax category. And our total there is 431, 768, 34. And insurance has its own line item as well, so we'll plug that in. 177, 813, 39. We'll make sure our expenses prove out the same way that our income did. Okay, so our expenses here are 1,596,819.81. And everything proves out, we're in good shape with that. So for now, we're all done with the T12. Now, let me point one thing out, just because it jumps out to me right away. It's not something I mentioned as much during the underwriting sessions, but just because it's right in my face and it caught my eye. What type of debt do you think these people may have on this property?
Sorry, could you repeat the question, Charles?
Yes. What type of debt do you think these people may have on this property?
I mean, the interest expense keeps changing, so what to be something more variable?
That's my thinking exactly. I agree with you fully on that. So what I see here is in certain months it was 50,000 and 48,000. Now it's up to 124,000. Now, granted, it started higher and kind of worked its way down, but do you think that might have something to do with why this property is for sale?
Oh, yeah.
So if you're paying 50,000 a month and it goes up to 125, that's a $75,000 a month difference. Over the course of a year, that's $900,000. Could that impact how your property performs?
Yeah, big time.
Absolutely.
Could it push you closer to the brink of bankruptcy if you don't have a lot of reserve money?
Yeah.
Sure.
Do you think there's a lot of deals in that situation right now?
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Hey, Charles.
Yep.
So can you explain, because I think conceptually this is good to understand, what happens in these instances, right? Like, is it the GP money shoving money in? Is it doing capital calls? What does that look like?
Bridge with a floating rate.
I was going to put the question back to you, but I'll answer this one because I think it's probably an important one.
Yeah.
So you only have so many options. You know, in some cases, if you have deep reserves, you might be able to float it. That's a good thing if you do. You should have deep reserves. Do you think most people have deep enough reserves to absorb those types of hits?
No.
I would agree with you. Okay, so you have a few options. One, you have enough reserve money, you can weather the storm, you float it. That's the absolute best case scenario. Another scenario is you go out and you find new financing and you refinance. May not be possible in all cases. Why might it not be possible? Does anybody want to shed some light on that?
debt service coverage ratio or interest rates too high?
Yeah, so it could be, yeah, I think those are probably some good reasons. Probably a combination of those. What else has happened? So with a lot of these deals that were purchased with adjustable rate loans, what type of deals were they?
That is busy, 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 busy. What was the question again?
Yep, for a lot of these deals that were purchased with bridge loans, what type of deals were they?
They were over leveraged.
There's probably a lot of truth to that. I agree with that.
The deals that didn't qualify for like Fannie, Freddie Mac.
Right. In a lot of cases, they were valued.
Add value.
But to Roger's point, many of them were just flat out over leveraged and you know, that was kind of where they were. So the thing is, okay, so now you're trying to refinance. Let's say you bought the property in 2021, or maybe early 2022. Where are property values now in comparison to where they were then? In just about every market in America.
I mean,
They're actually going down. Not that the owners think they are, but they are.
Right. They're going down. So let's say, I'm just going to use a random number. I have no idea what this guy owes, but let's say he has a $20 million loan. Now let's say his property is less valuable now than it was then. Can he go out and find another $20 million loan, especially as interest rates are rising?
No.
In most cases, not. They probably have to have increased the NOI pretty drastically. And in most cases, you're probably not going to have that much room. So what does that mean in terms of refinancing? You could always refinance, but what are you going to have to do?
I would assume you have to either bring more money.
Right, you're going to have to bring more money. So if you have a $20 million loan and you can only get an $18 million loan now, what does that mean you need to do?
Capital call your investors.
so ask your investors for more money.
Well, that's certainly one answer. I mean, yeah, you're going to see that more and more common. I don't like that solution, but it's possible. Or you got to come out of pocket yourself or something. But let's say you have a scenario like that. How many people have $2 million liquid they can just throw into something like that?
A very select few.
Right. It's certainly not a wide number. Okay, so you could do a cash in refinance, not cash out, cash in. Those are going to be common this year for people who do have the money to do that. That's not going to be a large percentage of the population. Another option is an equity recapitalization. Admittedly, I probably need to learn a little bit more about those myself because I know that's going to be a popular strategy this year, and I probably need to become more well versed in that. But it's something that's an option. Another option is selling at a discount and just getting out of the property to try and preserve as much capital as you can. And then you have the last option, getting foreclosed on. So those are your options. You're either weathering the storm, you're selling, you're replacing the equity, you're replacing the debt, or you're sinking with the ship.
How would you replace the debt?
What's that?
How would you replace the debt?
So you would have to go out there and refinance. And in most cases, being that a lot of these properties, almost all, are worth less now than when those original loans were taken out, you're probably going to have to come out of pocket and do a cash in refinance as opposed to just a straight replacement in most cases.
But with this property though, isn't it worth more as the NOI is going up?
Good question, Erwin. So I've done this example a few times, but I think it bears repeating because it's going to be a very important one this year. So I'm just going to pull the calculator for a minute because I think this is important for everybody to understand. Okay, so let's take a peek here. Let's just use a simple example and say, yeah. So how do you calculate purchase price? Let's start with that.
NOI.
Right. Okay, so let's just use a simple example, $100,000 of NOI, okay? Now, let's say that you bought the property in 2012 and you bought it a 7 cap, which wasn't that tough to buy at a 7 cap in 2012, right? A lot of markets were at somewhere in that ballpark. So let's say you have that $100,000 NOI at a 7 cap, property's worth $1,428,000.
That's if you don't have any repairs or any rehab whatsoever, right, Joss?
Well, the truth is yes and no. So if you're doing a traditional valuation, it wouldn't really factor that component in as much. But you're right, obviously, it would factor into a real valuation. But now let's say you have that same $100,000 of NOI. Let's say you did nothing to it and cap rates compressed. Do you think anybody who bought a property in 2012 that maybe they realized some cap rate compression if they still owned it in 2015?
Yeah.
So if you take that same $100,000 NOI and you've done nothing, now your property is worth $572,000 more. Okay, so now let's say maybe you bought the property here at a 5 cap. Were people buying at 5 caps in 2018? And
Yes. Yes.
okay, so let's say that you did that. And did anybody see any markets where 3 caps were pretty common in 2021?
Yes.
Let's say you're a complete idiot. You did nothing to the NOI.
In Florida.
5 cap, and now it's at a 3. Your property increased $1,333,000 in value. You think, boy, I'm brilliant. How brilliant were you? I mean, you were brilliant enough to ride the cap rate compression. You didn't increase the NOI though. But good, you know, if you made money in that time, good. That's okay. But now let's say things are going the opposite direction, right? So now let's say you bought at the 3 cap. Do you think it's fair to assume that there were probably a couple of purchases in 2021 and early 2022 that were in 3 caps and maybe even lower than that?
Yes.
Yeah.
So obviously cap rate decompression is changing from market to market. But in most markets, at least the ones I'm looking in, I would say I've seen at least 150 basis points of decompression in many of them, at least. Some of them more. So let's say all of a sudden you bought at that 3 cap with $100,000 NOI, your property is worth 3.3, and now you're at a 5 cap, and that's $2 million. So now instead of saying, boy, I'm brilliant, you're thinking, boy, I'm an idiot, I lost $1.3 million. So let's increase the NOI. And I'm going to play with this just to kind of show the example so you can kind of see how these things factor in. So let's say you increase the NOI 25%. So for anybody here who's looked at some deals, do you think 25% is a pretty good increase on the NOI?
That's crazy. Yeah.
Right. Do you think it's one that's highly likely in most cases?
No.
Neither
no.
do I. Okay, let's just say you do a really good job, and now you take your $100,000 NOI and you do a great job, and now it's $125,000. Okay, so now you're at that same 5 cap. So you bought $100,000 NOI at a 3 cap, worth $3.3 million. You did a great job, not even good. You did a great job. Now, let's go one further. Let's say you did a really great job, a 50% increase. You know, would everybody here say that's a pretty good increase?
Yeah.
That's excellent.
Okay, so now with that 5 cap, okay, you're almost at break even. You're only down $333,000 now, only. You're almost even with a Herculean effort that took 50% of the NOI to increase it. But because market conditions have changed, you're still less valuable than where you were. So why am I making this illustration? So the thing is, the increasing the NOI obviously is important. The problem is even increasing the NOI, to Ernest's question, may not be enough, because if cap rates are decompressing, which they have been, and they're likely to continue decompressing over the next year, maybe 2 years, that means you're swimming against the tide. And for the record, I'm not a swimmer. I can barely go in the pool and float. But you know, but if you try swimming against the tide, how does that usually work out?
Not very well.
Right. So that's kind of where a lot of things are now. And that's going to present a lot of opportunities, because even people who have done very well and they've executed their plans are going to fail in some cases. Not all, but in some. because their properties are worth less.
Hmm.
Let me see, I see we have a question in the chat box from Gene. How do you increase or decrease cap rate? Is this something you can manipulate? Good
No.
question. Unfortunately, the answer is no. So the cap rate is really set by the market, and it's not so much by any individual buyer. So every transaction will have a cap rate that it's sold at, but that cap rate is usually dictated more by the market. So if you're looking at a C property in Charlotte, they probably have a general range they're trading in. If you're looking at an A asset in Oklahoma City, they probably have a general range they're trading in. So different asset classes and different markets will have different cap rates, but they're generally more set by the overall transaction activity in the market than any one individual transaction.
Hey, Charles, quick question, please.
Yes.
This is very interesting topic talking about cap rate, and I know why Gene asked a question about the cap rate. Can you control the cap rate? I guess you can control the cap rate pertaining to the transaction itself of your actual property, but not the market, correct?
Right, correct.
Perfect. So in using the calculator that we have right now for the SDA, it has an exit strategy and it adds 10 basis point at the end. What does that mean? The calculator is telling you that the actual value of your property is decreasing 10 basis point?
Good question. So, so what the syndicated deal analyzer does is it takes whatever number you put in your current market cap rate in row 60 on the scenarios tab, and it adds 10 basis points to that. So it's not necessarily the cap rate for the individual transaction, but what you're seeing in the market, that's what they tell you to place there. So depending how aggressive or conservative you are, I've seen many people put very different numbers here. To me, I'm quite bearish on where things are going. So I've been generally increasing these numbers because I do feel there's still some more decompression. But if you were to use the tool exactly as you know they instruct you to, then you would put whatever the market cap rate is now, and they would add 10 basis points a year. And that could be a good enough spot. I personally think we're going to have more decompression than that. So it's kind of why I've been bumping up these cap rates. You know, where the risk comes in is general rule of thumb, conservative underwriting does see higher terminal cap rates than it does market cap rates at the time of the acquisition. What it doesn't do is account for major cap rate decompression. Right now, we're seeing some major decompression. So there's a good chance that 10 basis points a year may not truly be enough. So to me, I'm going a bit higher than that at this point, just because I do have a bearish outlook on where things are heading. But that's going to come down to everybody's perspective and how bullish or bearish they probably are on the market.
So when you become more aggressive with that underwriting, you adjust the cap rate, you adjust it in this section right here.
Right.
The cap rate is 5.5, you put 6.5, for example.
Right. And then for the terminal cap rate, it'll just add 10 basis points to whatever.
Okay, I got it. Yep. Beautiful.
And Alicia has a question: what's the multifamily equivalent of subject to? Could that be an option, or would that just be an assumable loan situation? So you could use subject to with any strategy, even with multifamily and commercial. Admittedly, if you were using a syndication strategy, I probably wouldn't recommend it, but I would tell you consult your attorney. If you're buying smaller stuff and you're just kind of doing it on your own without, you know, a syndication structure involved, you know, I think it's probably something very feasible. You know, in most cases, you may not see things like that. So what I would say is you are going to see a lot of operators that start getting very desperate. Some are probably there already. And some of them may be open to it because they may realize that their credit could be torched anyway at that point. But it's probably going to take a real perfect storm of events. If you're doing it with smaller multifamily, like you know, an 8-plex or a 12 unit, you know, you may see more opportunities for subject twos like that than you will in 100 and 200 unit properties. But technically, you could use it, you know, in any one of them. Assumptions are very popular at this point, Alicia. Not every loan is assumable, so I'm going to go on a limb and say that most likely this loan probably isn't, unless it's a Freddie floater, because Freddie Mac does have adjustable rate loans. But I'm going to go on a limb and say they probably have bridge financing. And as a general rule of thumb, most bridge loans are not assumable.
Okay.
And let's see, we have another question in the chat box. Okay, so JR is asking, will there be a replay for today's Zoom? Yes, there will. So it usually goes out every Saturday at 9 p.m. And Dylan saying, listing agents love to manipulate cap rates. Yes and no. Keep in mind they're in the business of sales. And when they're selling properties for you, you'll want them to do the same thing. So cap rates are what they are, but there's always going to be some subjectiveness to them, because the reality is it's very tough to really figure out the NOI of a property is, because it's not really public information. So aside from just agents, you see buyers and sellers that lie on that stuff all the time. You'll see services like CoStar and other paid services that do include information, but where are they getting that information from? They usually go into the parties. So if somebody wants to tell a fib about it, they can do that. And oftentimes that becomes gospel.
Hey, Charles, I have two questions. First, is to go back to the brokers and how they present a deal. So I was talking to a broker the other day. I was asking him if he's still seeing people put in 100,000 plus per unit in offers, and he was saying, yeah, we're still getting 15 offers per deal, and I kind of took that with a grain of salt, and I want to get their opinion. How do you know if a broker's really telling you the truth, or if they're just trying to blow smoke?
There's no real way to know, because none of those things are public information.
Yeah.
So the only thing you can do is speak to multiple people and kind of listen to what the bulk of them are telling you. So
Okay.
like sometimes I'll speak to some and maybe I'll get one outlier and 5 who tell me kind of the same thing. And maybe the one person's lying and maybe their experience is a little bit different. Maybe they've been the exception. They're the one that's doing all the deal volume in the area. So maybe their numbers are a little higher. But what I usually would recommend is multiple people and just seeing what they say, so you get some different perspectives. But I know at least down here in like the Carolinas and Georgia, almost all of them are telling me they're just not seeing anywhere near the transaction volume or the offers or anything like that. Now, what I would say is there is a lot of money out there still.
Yeah.
But a lot of that money's up on Wall Street. And the key is some of those groups are ready to deploy money now, but then you have other groups that are waiting for things to get really bad. And they know that's happening. So they're keeping some cash ready so that way they can swoop in and get some great deals when the time is right. So there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of money waiting to position itself for great opportunities. Some that's ready to go now. It's just having the circumstances line up. So it'll probably depend a little bit, but I would say, Jason, to speak to more brokers. If they're all kind of telling you the same thing, then maybe that's the case in that particular market. But I would say in most markets in America right now, you're probably seeing significantly less offers and lower prices.
I would say that based on my conversations with people, I would say that right now it's only the bigger brokerage that's still saying that. For example,
it makes sense because they're going to be the ones controlling the volume anyway. Now, the one thing I would say is I feel like most markets really had incredible run-ups in this last boom. But general rule of thumb is that the Midwest markets do have less volatility because it's usually the coastal markets that see bigger swings. They go to the extreme highs and then they get really hurt as the market changes. I feel like even the Midwest saw many more gains this time around than they have in previous cycles, which means they will see a little more downward action too. But generally, the Midwest is more stable, so you don't usually see the crazy price swings that you will in some of the coastal markets.
Okay. And then one more question, Charles.
Yeah.
Ever since I've been in multifamily, I've always looked at things from a buyer's perspective. However, if I was a seller, right? If I was a seller, like, let's say I did a really good job of actually doing the asset management, and then I got the average expense, like let's say $4,000 per unit. And then here now it's time for me to sell the property.
Yep.
And then here comes a buyer like me, and I said, no. It's not realistic for you to actually run this property at 4,000 expense per unit. Based on my conversation with property managers, it's more like 5,000 expense per unit. As a seller, what's the whole point of me like lowering my expenses down? If you have buyers who are going to just ignore that fact and to go with the rules of thumb that they got from property managers and.
So I think that most sellers would do one of two things. One, maybe they legitimately are running the property cheaper, or maybe they're just capitalizing a lot of things so it doesn't show as much in the operating expenses. But a lot of them are probably aware that most buyers are going to underwrite things with their own perspective in mind anyway. If anything, maybe they're hoping to catch a schmuck, for lack of a better term, and just get somebody who's going to underwrite it based on that and pay a crazy price. There's still a few out there, not nearly as many as there were, a year or two ago, but there's still a few. So perhaps they're hoping for that, or maybe they're hoping to catch a 1031 exchange buyer. A lot of exchange buyers usually do pay premium prices on things. So, that could be a possibility too.
Okay. Right, Charles. Thanks.
You're welcome. And Grant has a question: is there a way to adjust that 10 basis points per year for the exit cap to account for current market conditions? Grant, yes, if you go to your exit strategy and go to H9. So they do have the bump in here. Admittedly, this formula is beyond my level of expertise with Excel, so you probably need somebody else in here to guide you through that. But I'm sure that there's a way in here to adjust whatever that bump is.
Yeah, Christian answered it.
Okay, good.
He said that there's a hidden sheet called variables. I found it.
Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, well, so we can dive back into this then. So is everybody clear on how that valuation may, and how the NOI increase and the cap rate adjustment may factor into a property valuation?
Absolutely.
Okay, good.
And in the case of somebody has like an agency debt, let's say for the past 4 years, let's say, right, and expected to exit within 5 years, and now we have this problem with devaluation of properties and the cap rate decompression. So does that mean he's going to go back to the investors and say, hey, we're going to hold another 2 more years of investment, 7 years return instead of 5?
I would say in most cases, if they have more time, yes, that's the benefit to having more time. So even if you have well-performing properties, and this may surprise some of you guys, but there can be well-performing properties that get foreclosed on. Why? Has anybody in here ever heard of Charles Dobson? He's a famous or well-known multifamily educator who's also an attorney. Anybody familiar with Charles Dobson?
Yeah.
So I've heard him tell this story a couple of times. It was kind of eye-opening or ear-opening the first couple of times I heard it. But he had, I think, 2 deals that got foreclosed on in the prior recession. And from what he said, they were both deals that performed well. They were paying the debt service every month. They were profiting. But what happened? Has anybody ever heard the story or no?
No.
No.
So what happened is his notes, and he had agency loans on them, his notes came due. And now all of a sudden, even though the properties were performing, What he couldn't do was get the loan extended, and he couldn't get the valuation because the property was worth less. So essentially, the lender took the properties back. And that's going to happen. So you'll see some cases, even with properties that are performing well, get in trouble. So just kind of keep that in mind. Not every property that gets foreclosed on is going to be a rough beat up property. A lot of them will be, but there'll be some that are actually well-performing assets that still get foreclosed on just because market timing kind of went against them and they got the short end of the stick. So that'll happen.
So he had a property that was paying the investors back and paying the debt on time, but the valuation of the property itself got dropped down because of the
Right.
market turn.
Yep.
So he couldn't actually sell it at the price to pay the loan back and pay the investors back. And he couldn't refinance unless he cashes in, basically.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So you'll see some instances like that. Not every property that gets foreclosed on is going to be, you know, a bottom of the barrel property. So keep that in mind. Okay. So then the T12, we have everything factored in here. So now let's take a peek at our OM. What are we looking for as we go through the OM?
Questions to ask a broker.
Right. So keep in mind, guys, you have to engage the broker. Unless you're dealing with smaller properties and you own direct to seller, but if you're dealing with brokers, you have to engage them and you have to speak to them regularly. So that means you want to look at deals, you want to speak with them, and you want to be submitting offers. For them to really take you seriously, you have to be submitting offers. And what you'll see is the more offers you submit, the more seriously they start to take you. So overall, is this a nice looking asset?
Would it be more important actually from the OMs that we look at? And for this practice in our sessions is to look at the numbers from the actual broker to see how they did the performer.
I think it's always a good idea too. I wouldn't take the numbers as gospel, but I think it's a starting point, and it's probably something you could ask them some questions about. So those are all good things to have. Okay, so as we go through the OM, we get some, table of contents, and we also get some information on the team running the sales process. This deal is brokered by Cushman and Wakefield, so a lot of the larger companies also have debt teams. So what they're showing you here is they have 3 guys on their debt team for this deal, and you can reach out to them, and usually they'll be able to send you a debt quote. So if you're dealing with these big brokerages and they have debt teams, you may as well use them. They can be great resources. Okay, so some more information about the sale process and also a photograph of the pool and the common area. This looks like a pretty nice new asset almost. Let's see. Not quite new, I guess, but newish. But okay, so it looks like here. So this might explain some of our issue with the vacancy. Could this potentially be why the vacancy was so high?
Yeah, student, seasonal.
Yep. So that they converted it to conventional, which was something that was quite common in the pandemic, because especially in a market like Tallahassee, which anybody not familiar with, the Tallahassee definitely has a major student presence there. And as more and more people stopped going to in-person classes during the pandemic, you saw a lot of properties repositioned. So in this case, they spent an astronomical amount of money, nearly $7 million. Is this property probably almost like new?
I would hope so. It's been
Right. Right. That's a lot of money. So just to put in perspective, if you take that number and divide it by, what is this property? I think 252 units. Oops, I missed a zero. That's almost $27,000 a unit. That's a lot of money, guys. So that's a lot of money they've invested in this property.
Yep.
Okay, so they're showing us here, the property was fully vacated for construction. Okay, so in that case, we probably don't really need to ask the broker about that, because that seems to be a pretty clear case. They're telling us what happened here, and they're showing us kind of why we had the vacancy issue and what happened with the property. So I think those are good things that give us a lot of clarity. New roofs on 17 of the buildings, new hardy board replacement, exterior painting. So they put a lot of work into this property. at nearly $7 million, you're not doing just, light cosmetic upgrades at that point. So this is a lot of money in this property, and it was a 1998 build to begin with, so it wasn't really a terribly old property to start. Who do you think your competition is on this deal?
Institutional?
Yeah, it's kind of what I would think. I think you'll have a lot of institutions fighting for this. Can't blame them. It's a nice looking asset. Looks like it's had a lot of money poured into it. So those are all good things. Some basic information about the construction, good favorable floor plans at average unit sizes of 983 square feet. And again, this was 1998 construction, aside from the $7 million they put into it. So all the construction items seem to be fairly modern. There's really not too much to be concerned with at that price point or at that vintage. What we'll do here is we'll make a quick note of our unit mix. So the 1 bed, 1 baths, there's 24 of those. We'll just put that in our target rent analysis. Now, it's interesting because even though the property does have some decent floor plans, the one thing that does jump out to me is that the ones are quite small, especially for a 1998 build. For the 2 bedrooms, we have 3 different floor plans ranging in size from 825 to 1,000 square feet. And it looks like our total here is 132 of those, so we'll plug that in. And we should have 96 threes if my math is correct, and we do. And those also have very nice floor plans. So keep in mind, guys, as you enter this here, the target rent analysis chart does not affect anything in the underwriting. The reason I fill this in is it's simply to give you a bird's eye view of the unit mix at the property and also the kind of your starting and ending point. So this is just more for the optics. It doesn't really do anything for your underwriting. Okay, so now we look here, they're telling us about the value add, which is interesting because you would think they put $7 million in the property. What the heck more are we going to do to it? But apparently they're still saying we could spend some more. So they're suggesting, higher grade countertops, stainless steel appliances, enhanced tech packages, which, a lot of the younger people go for at this point, and backsplash in the kitchen. So those are all things we could consider, along with some different amenities. They're showing us kind of a CapEx budget and their value add. Now, normally for a property this size, I would say $756,000, even for a 1998 build, is probably a lower number. But what do you guys think? Being they put nearly $7 million into it, do we feel okay with that type of CapEx number? Does anybody have any objection to that?
Well, I don't see how they're getting a return on that investment.
So it's a good question. I think we'd have to see really where the premiums are, but I would kind of agree with you, Roger. I like the idea of having some CapEx budget in there anyway, because there may still be some little odds and ends we find. But the truth of it is they've done a pretty substantial amount of work. And I have a feeling that the bigger return is really going to be operational at this point. And as they said, kind of just closing the gap on mark to market, which is really the loss to list.
Hey, Charles. Can we talk about what we were talking about in our private email conversation? Because that was a very that was a very eye-opening time for me. It's a
Yes,
new
in terms of the CapEx. So
yes, even if you are not planning to make those updates to the interior of the unit, you should still put in, some kind of money for that.
Right.
And that how you calculate that number should be. Like, for example, if you're gonna get the woods, and it's gonna cost you like, let's say, 12,000. You should just put in like 8,000 as for like reserves. And how that number is gonna affect smaller deals compared to bigger deals.
Sure. So, to both, Roger and Jason's points, you always want to have some CapEx money in there, because the thing is, every property is always gonna have things wrong with it.
Yeah.
And sometimes you may not be able to see what's wrong in the picture in the OM. So usually the pictures are designed to showcase the best aspects of the property, so you may not see everything that's wrong. So it's always good to have some money, because things are inevitably going to come up, and they're probably gonna cost more than whatever you think they're gonna cost. And the older and bigger the property is, probably the more money you wanna have. So, but what I also wanna do is be cognizant of, obviously how that's gonna impact the returns. So what I would tell you, with any 200 unit, 1970s property, there's no doubt in my mind, you could find $3 to $4 million of work to be done. No doubt in my mind. Does that mean I want to do $3 to $4 million of work? Probably not. Because I may not get a return on that. So what you want to do is have some money, so that way you can go in there and execute whatever your plan is. You can go in there and correct any major deferred maintenance items. But, maybe I want to go in there and do $1 million worth of work, because, maybe there's some roofs that are bad that I'm going to need to replace. Maybe I'll need money for some HVAC units, but maybe I don't want to replace all 250 HVAC units. Maybe I don't want to replace 18 roofs. So, I wouldn't necessarily budget for the full amount, but make sure you have cushion there. And specifically on smaller deals, it's like the one Jason was looking at, I think was an 8 unit. So you want to be cognizant that, especially on those smaller deals, the dollar impact is going to have a much greater impact on your returns. So, for every couple $1,000s you increase it on a deal that size, it's going to hurt that much more. A couple $1,000 on a 200 unit deal is probably not that big of an impact, but a couple $1,000 on an 8 unit property could be a big difference maker.
So,
Charles. Yeah, Charles, let me ask you another question pertaining to what you just said, Ashley. Would it be a good strategy to find properties that have deferred maintenance, then go in there and correct the deferred maintenance only, and then put it back on the market for resale?
Personally, yes. I mean, I think that's a solid idea. I mean, to be honest, I put more money at this point in the exteriors than I would the interiors. Even though I budget, for the interiors, I kind of reallocate that budget once we actually see the property and we figure out, where the issues are. Because I find that for a few reasons. One, there's a housing shortage in most markets in America. So what that means is there's probably room, at least in some cases, to push rents. Maybe not as aggressively as you could have a year or two ago, but there's probably room to push rents in most markets simply on the basis that you have a legitimate housing shortage. And that means you probably don't need to do as much to the units. The second thing I would say is, the exterior of the property is going to be what draws people into it. You could have the most beautiful units in the city. Nobody's going to stop and look if the exterior of the property looks like crap. Okay, so if it doesn't look good, nobody's even going to look at the interiors, because they're just going to keep driving by it. So you want to have, nice landscaping. You want to have a nice sign. You want the property to appear clean from the outside. So you want it to make a good impression when people are driving by, because that's going to be what gets them in the door to begin with. And then the other thing is, being there's so many buyers looking for value adds now, the perception that's out there is, if the units aren't upgraded, that they could push rents. And sometimes that's true, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes you kind of sucked all the juice out of there anyway. But because of the perception that by upgrading units, you might be able to extract more juice out of it, people like that and they pay for it. So to me personally, I'm fine with that idea. And I think that it's actually a very effective strategy at this point, because if you go in there and correct the big ticket items and you give people a fairly clean property to go buy, I think you'll find you have a pretty good buyer pool, especially since people are really looking for, these types of value-add deals at this point.
So Charles, so going back to that example, right? Let's say it's going to cost you 12,000 to do everything, to do like paint, appliance, floor, countertops, everything. However, you only put in, let's say, 8,000 for the interior units because you don't want to put in that much money in each unit. And let's say that it's going to cost you 4,000 to update the floors, and then 3,000 it's going to go to the appliances. So if like let's say you need to update the floor and appliances, and then that's gonna take up all your money for that particular unit. How confident are you that you can actually hit your target rent?
So I think it's going to depend on a few things. One obviously is demand, what type of demand do you see in the market and the local area? And two, how much housing stock is there? So, in a lot of cases, many markets have more demand than they have supply. Now, eventually, and maybe sooner than later, maybe at least in the short term, that may start shifting as the market worsens. Why could that shift? What would change that? Are we immediately going to have enough housing units where overnight our housing shortage is solved?
No, but demand is going to go down, especially as people lose their jobs and they
Right.
can't afford to go live by themselves.
Bingo, you hit the nail on the head. So we're certainly not going to solve the supply issue overnight. Pretty much every article I've read, states that at least until 2035, just about every major market in America is going to have a housing shortage. And let's be truthful, I've been seeing those articles for quite some time. So I'm not overly confident that it's really going to be resolved by 2035, because that date seems to keep getting pushed back. And if you have a recession and development stops, that's probably not going to help that unless we just have a significant, reduction in population, which probably isn't going to happen in the immediate future. But in the very immediate sense, you're right. If people start losing jobs, what's going to happen is they're going to go live with mom and dad. They're going to go live with 4 cousins. They're going to go find something to do that's not putting the same expense burden on them that they have now. So you may see demand start to go down as that happens and as the economy worsens. And in that case, it's going to make it tougher to push rents. But I think it's really a case of just kind of assessing the market that you're in, seeing, what type of demand you have, and looking at what the comps are getting. So my general thought is, if I look around and I see in an immediate area that, okay, there's a lot of people here that are charging $100 more than the subject property, and they're all fairly close, they're decent comps, then I feel confident that I can probably do the same thing. My general rule of thumb is, if somebody can't go on Google or they can't go on apartments.com or Zillow and look in the immediate area and find something of similar quality at a much cheaper price, then you know what? You can probably do the same thing. If they're going on Zillow and they're going on apartments.com, and everything else is way cheaper and there's no discernible advantage that the property has, then you may need to think a little bit differently. But I think, yeah, go for it.
So if there's a comp, let's say there's like a comp that is similar in vintage, size, blah, blah, amenities. However, this one is fixed up to the T. Meaning that they had new floors, quartz countertops, paint, appliance, and they're charging for 1,200. Versus your property that is that's dated, but you're projecting it to rent for 950. Would you be confident in you hitting that 950?
If I saw comps that supported it, definitely. If I saw that there was way more demand in the market than there is supply. I feel pretty good about it. Where I wouldn't feel as good about it is if I see that things are sitting on the market longer and all of a sudden rents start coming down in general and people are losing jobs and now they're consolidating and living with mom and dad or a relative. You know, that's probably when I would start thinking twice about that, because then you may have an issue and you may have a disadvantage. But
So, I guess what I'm trying to get to Charles is that we're still not at that point where we're making offers based on actual numbers, right? Not yet.
in most cases, no, we're getting there
Okay.
little by little, but not yet.
Okay, cool.
You know, occasionally I'm starting to see some that are kind of coming there, but I just haven't seen anything that makes sense or that's in a market that excites me yet. But little by little they're coming. You know, we're probably still another 6 to 12 months before you see it straight across the board, and then you'll see a while where all of a sudden everything makes sense because you're buying on actual numbers.
Wow. I can't wait. Thank you, Charles.
According to Dave Lindahl, he said even the California markets, there'll probably be a brief 4 to 6 month window where they actually become cash flow positive.
Wow. And when that happens, would you actually consider looking into Los Angeles and New York?
It's a good question. Well, he didn't say New York. He said California specifically.
Okay.
But he said there'll be like a brief 4 to 6 month window as things are rolling over where it actually makes sense. Part of me says I'd be nervous just because the tenant landlord was, but if I was ever going to buy in one of those markets in a multifamily or residential setting, it would be when the market's absolutely tanked and there's no way to go but up. Because the thing is, even if you have a terrible experience renting those properties, usually they'll increase in value so much at a pretty fast clip that it may be worthwhile anyway.
Got it. Thank you, Charles.
You're welcome. Okay, so we get some photographs of some of the comps in the area. We can see that a lot of them do have similar layouts. At least 3 of them here do have stainless steel appliances. And some more information and photographs of the property. Overall, from the exterior, it looks like a nice clean asset, so that's good. Landscaping seems to be in decent shape. Look at that beautiful pool, very sizable. That's a nice selling point that you can put on the property website, I'm sure. Well, I guess there's a lot of truth. The picture's worth 1,000 words because they sure aren't giving us many words here. But description of what the property has in terms of amenities, and they have a lot of the standard amenities that many Southeast properties do. One thing that's interesting, well, 2 things. One is the pickleball court, because that seems to be gaining popularity in more and more places now. But the unique one actually that caught my eye is the golf course. You don't see too many properties with that. So that could be a nice little selling point that I bet that has some people going to it. And then you also have some trail access. So I think this property does actually have some unique amenities that probably even give it an advantage over some of the other properties in the area, I would think. Nice high ceilings in the clubhouse, nice professional layout here in the leasing office and clubhouse, so that's good. You can see they've obviously put some money into this. It looks like, the fitness center, I was going to say it may be sizable, but it may just be the photography. This may be the entire fitness center right here, so it's hard to say. And it looks like some type of mail or package room. But overall, a nice clean asset. You can see the tennis courts are nice and new, which almost makes me wonder why would anybody do a nice new tennis court in today's day and age, because nobody seems to really use them anymore.
Yeah, it looks phenomenal.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that you'll have a lot of institutional buyers very excited for this one. Actually, these are the types of assets I'd like to really start buying going forward. But, it's all a mix of what you have. So some photographs of the units and the different amenities they have in them. And the units have, a very modern feel to them, which is expected with the amount of money they spent. And some of the floor plans they have for the different units here at the property. Maybe I missed it. I didn't realize it said 3-bedroom, 4-bath on there, so perhaps I missed that on the prior one, but I'll actually adjust the unit count to reflect that. So I think Gene had pointed out that the large number of bathrooms might be due to the former use of student housing, and that probably has something to do with it, because 4 bathrooms in a 3-bedroom is definitely quite generous. Okay, we get a site map of the property, and you can see a lot of greenery on here. Certainly a big property to maintain, I'm sure. The street right here is 18,500 vehicles per day, so not a bad street, some decent traffic on that. Looks like it will be high visibility for the property. So, the closest store I see to the property is a Family Dollar. So, what does that tell us about the area?
Lower socioeconomic.
It's kind of what I'm thinking, which is surprising with all the money they put into this asset. It certainly doesn't look like that. Maybe it's possible something's coming to the area that's changing it. Some of the properties here don't necessarily look bad from the aerial view. But it does make me think twice when there is a Family Dollar that close, because you're right, usually that would be a lower socioeconomic demographic. Okay, so some information about Tallahassee for anybody who's not familiar with it. Tallahassee is an interesting market, as is kind of the Florida Panhandle as a whole. I feel like while there is some things to be excited about there, I think the biggest thing to be excited about is Florida as a whole. And what's happening is that being so many of the other markets have gotten so pricey, you've seen markets in the Panhandle become desirable because of that. Okay, so we get some rent comps, which we'll come back to these in a little bit as we look through our numbers, but not just yet.
Charles, but back on that other plan, what was 18,500 VDP? What did that mean?
Sure, so that's just the traffic that's going up and down that street.
Oh, vehicles per day. Thank you.
Vehicles per day, yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we have some sales comps, which I'm starting to see in more and more OMs now. Interestingly enough, they can only come up with one comp. Seems like either they're not working too hard or they're not motivated to include that many of them. So that may tell you all you need to know about the market right there. But we can see this particular asset sold for $212 a door. And we'll keep that in mind kind of as we look at our numbers in just a moment. And we get the broker putting here a summary of what the rent roll is as of mid-November. And then their pro forma. So different things that we may want to question and take a peek at. So one of the things I always do is I go through the pro formas. I like to see what major differences they're showing, because those are things I usually question on. And most times the things I question usually tend to be more on the expense side than they do on the income. But one thing that jumps out to me right away, so they have their projections at acquisition here, and then they have their year 1 pro forma here. So they're showing a significant reduction in loss to lease. Looks like a decent demographic at the property here, so that's probably achievable. So keep in mind, guys, has anybody here ever looked at a new construction? So the number, this property obviously is not new construction, but it does function maybe a little bit similar to it, simply for the fact that they totally vacated the property and then they're leasing it back up. So for anybody who's ever looked at new construction, what happens when you go to lease one of those properties up? Anybody have any guess? What's the primary goal whenever you're leasing up an empty asset?
Increase in rent.
100%.
And you want to get above 90% occupancy, so if somebody comes to buy, it qualifies for Fannie Freddie.
Okay, so we have one person saying increasing rents, 2 saying occupancy. So in this case, the people who voted occupancy are correct. And the reason for that, exactly as Sabian said, is you want to get the property stabilized. And that way it qualifies for some type of permanent debt. So either that way you could refinance into it, or if you're looking to sell the property, then you make it attractive to a new buyer. So what does that mean, being you're focusing primarily on occupancy? What happens with rents?
They're gonna stay the same. They're not gonna pretty much be doing a lot of changing if you're trying to get it occupied.
It could.
Below
No.
market, below market.
Below market. Yep, bingo. So you're gonna be given a lot of concessions usually. So keep in mind, when you have no units occupied, the first priority is getting that property full. Then usually what happens is after those initial leases expire and the property's filled, that's when you start really pushing. Then you burn off all those concessions. So in this case here, they're showing a sizable reduction in loss to lease, but given the story of this property, is that realistic? Does anybody have a thought?
I mean, this property was converted from student housing to regular multifamily, right?
Right.
It's occupied.
Yep. So in this case, it probably is realistic just because of what's happening with the property. So, I mean, you could question that if you wanted, but I feel like that one's, fairly self-explanatory. They show some of the other income items, and they do have increases, but again, I think a lot of these things really coincide with the initial leases burning, expiring and any concessions burning off. So some of them, they probably just didn't maximize because they're more concerned with getting the units filled than they are with pushing rents to the moon at that point. Okay, so then on the expense side, we're seeing the expenses rise a little bit on their pro forma. They're leaving the insurance number the same. Who here thinks the insurance number is going to remain the same as what the seller has?
Almost impossible in Florida unless they have some.
But very true. I would say it's probably unlikely in most cases, unless you're buying the property out of foreclosure for a lower price. But you're right, specifically for Florida, where Florida is right now, probably very unlikely. So, they're showing some increases here. They're showing an increase in repair and maintenance, which probably a realistic number. I mean, I'd probably still question it just to understand, but in this case, it's probably a matter of these guys have owned the property, and this is kind of where things are, and they're getting it to realistic numbers for the market.
Hey, Charles?
Yes.
Yeah, let me ask a question. Based on what you said was that the units is vacant, is that right?
Not anymore, but they were. It looks like they
Yeah,
started.
were. Okay. So if they were vacant, why not go ahead and get the best rent you can get in the primary time when you first start versus just put somebody in there and then get them out later down the road? Because if you take your time and get the right people in there in the very beginning, wouldn't your NOI be higher and the value of the property be higher?
Not necessarily, no. So the thing is, with the extra time it's going to take you, what's going to happen? You're going to have higher vacancy.
Right.
So what you may gain by pushing rents, you'll offset with longer vacancy times and more marketing expenses and more payroll dollars to get units leased. So oftentimes it'll kind of be a wash. But the general thought is when you have a property totally vacant and you're doing a full lease up, your main goal, similar to what Sabian said, is really to get it occupied. So that way it qualifies for permanent debt.
Gotcha. Thanks. Okay.
So oftentimes that's more important than maximizing. And especially if the goal is a sale and not a refinance, then you could also position it as opportunity, because now the new buyer can go in there and say, oh, well, I could burn all these concessions off. And now when I go in there the next year, I'm going to be able to bump rents by this much. So psychologically, you just open up to a bigger buyer pool, because you have some people who like that, whereas opposed to if you went in there with everything maxed out, you may have a smaller buyer pool because that's only going to open up to so many people.
Gotcha. Good. Thanks.
You're welcome. So the other, significant change on the expense side is really the management fee and the turnover. So, I think, again, both those numbers are kind of self-explanatory, but they're not bad to ask if you wanted to go back to the question, but they're, probably explanatory in this case. Okay, so we have some more information on the team running the process. Do you guys want to play with this deal and see where it makes sense?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, please.
Chris, you said the guidance on this one was somewhere in the 42 to $44 million range, right?
Correct.
Let's start with 42. Okay, so that's 166 a door. So let me just put something in perspective here, in case anybody did not pick up on it. Okay, so this property here, similar vintage, built in 2000 to 2005, must have been built in phases, sold at $212 a door in July of last year. Here they're only looking, let's say you go 44, so the high side of the guidance. They're at 174. That's $38,000 a door less on the high side of the guidance. Does everybody understand what's happening in the market right now?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, just making sure that this is an important lesson.
That comp, when was it sold?
July.
Oh my God.
So we're in January now. It's only 6 months later. And they're asking nearly, $40,000 a door less. Do you think if you go 6 more months, there's a chance this property may have an even lower price tag?
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you,
think that's so.
yes.
So just keep that in mind. That's kind of where we are right now in the market, guys. Now, Chris, I know you had some more details in the email. I forget what they were at this point, but aside from the price, was there anything else important that we should be aware of as we look at it?
No, that was the main thing there. Yeah, just the price for this.
Okay. So do you guys want to assume we're going to go in here with agency debt? Do you want to look at it from that perspective?
Sure.
Okay. So for anybody who's looking at agency loans recently, what are you seeing for your LTVs in most deals?
Very low.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. Any particular number or range?
60%, 65. 55.
Yeah, 55.
I was gonna say even 65 is on the high side at this point, to be honest. I ain't seen too many.
Right.
Right.
55 to 60.
Yeah, that's probably a realistic range, and probably unfortunately more on the 55 side in most cases. So let's go with the 45% down payment. And what are you guys seeing for interest only on most of these loans at this point?
36.
Yeah, that's pretty common for a loan this size. If you're using a small balance loan, probably 24 months. It's possible you could go even up to like 6 years, I would say, on the IO, but I would tell you to be conservative and go 36, and that's pretty common on almost all of them right now. In terms of an interest rate, what are you guys seeing?
Right, 6.5.
Yeah.
So 6.5 is a good conservative number. I would say you could probably use 6.25, even have that be conservative.
Yeah.
So if you close the loan today's Saturday, but let's say you closed yesterday or Monday, does anybody know where an interest rate might be for a loan this size on the agency side?
Yeah, I was just talking to Julie from Old Capital, and she said 6.32.
It's interesting. So I would say if you're closing in two to 3 months, you're probably right. Rates did come down last month. So you'd probably be somewhere like the 5.3 to 5.8 range if you close like right now.
Yeah.
But the caveat to that is, what do we have Tuesday?
Fed meeting.
It has a,
Right.
Just hey.
Right. We got a Fed meeting. So what's probably going to happen at that meeting?
Rates.
Right.
25 basis points.
Interesting, man. 25. I was going to say 50. I'm hearing. We'll see that. But
Well, Charles, also like given where the debt market is, right? There's probably like folks that are getting deals under contract. They may encounter a hiccup or two on the debt side, right? So even I think being conservative on that interest rate is going to be important.
what do you mean may encounter? Almost definitely.
Will encounter, yeah.
Yeah. So you're probably going to have some hiccups. So the 6.25 kind of builds in some increase that you may see, because there's the talk on the street right now is you're probably going to have 2 more rate hikes in Q1. And if the Fed is happy at that time with where inflation is, that may be the last rate hike for the immediate future. So, it's interesting. Ahmed said 25 basis point hike this time. He might be right. I've been hearing more 50 for the 2 hikes this quarter that are planned. But obviously those numbers change quite frequently. And keep in mind, when they have the Fed meetings, what they're hiking is the Fed funds rate. So that is not a 1-to-1 ratio for borrowing rates on the commercial real estate side. But there will be probably some impact. So if you use anywhere in that 6 to 6.5 range, you'd probably be fine. If you close right now, it'll be lower than that. But if we're looking at this deal right now, you're not going to be closing it right now. So put a little buffer in there, so that way you don't have to go back and retrade later on because of it.
Hey, Charles.
Yes, yes.
Charles, did you hear what they're doing? I heard Ken McElroy talk about it recently. He was saying that previously inflation was calculated by using the average of the last 2 years. However, starting in 2023, they're going to start calculating it based on the average of the last 12 months. So we might see a much lower inflation rate, just because they have done some creative magic with how they're going to start calculating.
Jason, I haven't heard that, but I'm not surprised. And what I would say is that is indicative of how government typically operates. If something doesn't, fit the narrative they want, then you change the definition. It's often why the CPI is useless. Something Bill Clinton said in the 90s always stands out to me, but it made a lot of sense. So the CPI, the one that's more commonly reported in the media, I think was created in 1956 off the top of my head. And, Bill Clinton said something to the effect of, well, if steak gets too expensive, the American people just start eating chicken. But the problem is, if you're tracking steak for 35 years and all of a sudden you replace steak with chicken, you don't really have an accurate cost of inflation. So you'll see that a lot with these different indexes and things like that. A lot of times they will be manipulated to fit, whatever perspective it is they want to convey at that time. So, if they're unhappy with the inflation reading, you just change the definition of it, and then all of a sudden you get a more favorable reading. So not surprised to hear that, and that may have some impact on public policy. You could be right on that. So, 6.25 will probably keep you safe at this point. And if you're using agency, you typically will have a 30-year amortization, so that's okay. What I would tell you is, for the operating reserves, normally I would go 8 months, and I'm probably going to do that starting out here. But being that the sellers put so much money into this property already, I wouldn't be opposed to reducing it maybe to 6 months, because there's a lot of CapEx dollars that have already been spent, and you're really buying a stabilized asset. If you were doing a heavier value add, I would tell you definitely want to stay with that 8 months to have cushion. In an asset like this, it looks like a nice cleaner asset. You're probably not going to have a ton of evictions when you go in there. So it's a nice clean starting point. So if you wanted to cut that number down, I wouldn't necessarily fault you for it. Okay, so now let's see our rents here and kind of come up with some targets. So let's take a peek at our rent comps. And let's start with our 1-bedroom units. So let's see if we have any context here on where the comps are. So it looks like number 7 is the closest to the subject property. None of the others are that close. I mean, they're not that far, but they're not that close. So just for the sake of example, number 7 is the Riley apartment. So we'll keep that in mind as we look at the comps. One thing I see right away is the occupancy. And I'm not really sure why that is. Maybe they've done a major renovation there as well, but not a great sign. Okay, so let's take a peek here. So in our 1 bedrooms, with this particular asset, we have, for whatever reason, significantly smaller floor plans. The 2s and the 3s are pretty adequately sized, but the 1s are quite small. It looks like here the property's already getting 1227, and on the broker's pro forma, they're at 1295. What do you guys think? Is that a reasonable comp? We're certainly not the highest in the area by any stretch. We're kind of, maybe $70, $68 higher than where it is now. Do you guys think that's a realistic bump?
I was
Considering
thinking it was.
Yeah, I would think so too. Just for the fact that it's really not that far above where the rents are now, I'm okay with it. Obviously, the floor plans are smaller, but they've put a lot of money into this property. So, for the demographic, they're likely to attract. I don't think $68 is probably going to be a deal breaker. So 2 bedrooms. They have 3 different floor plans here. They have one that's 825 square feet, one that's 850, and one that's 1,000. And they're pricing them all between 1327 and 1427 currently. And then on the pro forma, it looks like they're bumping them all up between, let's see, so $48 here on one, anywhere from 48 to $148. What do you guys think? Are these realistic? The Riley over here is at 1565 for a 900 square foot unit. That's the one that's closest to the subject property. Anybody have any thoughts or opinions?
I was in agreement with the pro forma.
I'm kind of okay with that too. I think it's encouraging to see
Should
that.
we know the occupancy of the Riley? Because if they're renting that much and no one is barely taking the place, that could mean that they're renting above market, versus if they're renting that much and it's at 100% occupancy, it could mean that it is underpriced.
So according to what they have here, they do show it at 80%. Now, I don't know the story behind that. I don't know if this property's also had a renovation and maybe that may have something to do with it. But if it's, just a normally run property, that wouldn't be very encouraging. So for simplicity right now, just because I have the 2s all lumped together, I'm going to go with a blended rate of, 1425. Is everybody good with that? Or 1450? I'm fine with anywhere in that range. Anybody have a thought?
1425 is good.
Okay, let's go with that. Okay, so then on the 3s, so here we have 2 different floor plans. We have a 3, well, apparently here it shows 3 by 2. It was just a floor plan that showed a 3 by 4. Let's just take a peek at the floor plan and see how many bathrooms this thing actually has. So depending on where you look in the OM, most spots call this a 3-2, but this spot here calls it a 3-4. So we can see 1 bathroom here, 2nd bathroom here, and it looks like they do have 2 back to back, so it is actually a 4 bathroom. Okay. Okay, so in our 3s, let's start with the 3-2s. So we have 72 of those. We have 1150. They're currently 1437. Brokers targeting 1695. How do you guys feel about that?
I mean, it looks like, pretty much on the higher end already.
Right now, I'd say they're kind of in the middle, but I do think these targets may be a little aggressive. Everybody have a thought here? What do you guys think we should place the targets at?
I mean, I would think anywhere between 1650 to 1700 even.
Yeah, I'm kind of okay with that. On the 3-2, I'd actually say even a bit lower. I'd probably be 1600, right around there. And then maybe 1,700 on the 340. You guys agree with that?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll plug those numbers in. So let me ask you a question. What's our target rent here?
1489.
Yeah, so what's our average monthly rent right now?
1404.
So it's not a very big spread. And that's okay, because we know what we're getting. They put a lot of money into this thing already. I'm actually going to add that in year one, just because there's really, in my perception, no work to do here. It's all operational. So I think we can make a case for that. What I would say is maybe we bump the loss to lease up a bit. Although this number here is actually quite similar to where the seller is. So you know what? I'm fine leaving it at 15%. That does give us a little bit of a bump over where the seller is on the effective gross income. And then we'll come over to the P&L tab. And what we'll do here is we'll just reduce these numbers down to more normal levels. So I'm going to drop the escalated to 0% for years 1 and 2 and 3% year 3 on. And the vacancy, what I'll do is I'm going to level this off by year 2. Now, if you want it to be more conservative, you can say it'll take us the extra year to burn off and then kind of scale down, simply because this is a nicer asset. So for the C assets, I have been using 12% consistently throughout the whole period at this point. But this, I would say, is definitely a solid B asset. You could even argue maybe it's a little higher than that with all the money they put into it. So this is a nice quality asset that's going to attract a good demographic. Now, I'm just going to change the metrics to what we would normally use. And let's adjust our expenses a bit too, because that's obviously going to be part of the equation. So as we look at the expenses, they're budgeting for a tax increase, which I would say is probably highly likely. So on the tax increase, let's see where they are. We'll kind of steal their numbers. It hurts my heart whenever I see an increase that big, but 269.73. So it looks like the number they have here is actually higher already. So somewhere in there's probably a discrepancy. But I'm going to put that increase on top because for right now, it's the best number we have. So if this is a deal we're actually looking at, again, you do want to contact the county assessor and just understand, where that number is actually going to be once you buy the asset. What do you think we might be at for a match? 252 units, nice asset. Where do you think we wind up?
Are you talking about from a per unit basis? What's typically a rule of thumb?
So in this case, I would say for management fee, let's do it on a percentage. So usually for something this size, nice asset, 3% will be fine. So we'll be okay with that. So in the pro forma, they are showing a higher number for repairs and maintenance. They're using 300 a door, and they're using 175 for turnover. What I would say is those numbers, I would say, are a little bit low. But considering how much money they put in the property, I'm not necessarily opposed to it. Maybe I'll bump the turnover just a smidgen just so we have some more money in there. I always like having more money than less. Okay, so unfortunately, our numbers are quite a bit higher than the sellers simply because of the tax increase. Do you think we should also be budgeting for an insurance increase?
Yeah.
Where do you guys think we should be going for this?
I'm in Florida and I know it can be double, but hopefully for
right.
a unit this size, maybe it's not that. Maybe there's some
No, you're absolutely
conversations
right.
for
It definitely
discounts.
could. It seems like a nicer asset. Tallahassee's a little more inland and not quite as coastal, but you're absolutely right. It wouldn't surprise me to see a double and even triple at this point. But, Chris, I know you've been looking at this market a bit. You want to go $1,000 a unit?
Yeah, that's kind of where I've been coming in with different insurance brokers to be safe, $1,000 a unit for Tallahassee.
Okay, so we'll use that for the time being, but obviously, if this is a deal that people are looking at, then you certainly want to reach out to an insurance broker and get an indication, because insurance right now is very volatile in general, but it's especially volatile in Florida.
Flint has it at 2,500 per unit.
What's that?
Flint has it at 2,500 per unit.
Yeah, at ratemap.org.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Florida's definitely gotten very pricey for sure. So it's really going to be all over the place. So I wouldn't fault anybody if you use that number. What I would say is if this is a deal anybody's considering, definitely reach out and get an insurance indication because this is gonna be a big variable. Okay, so then in our acquisition costs, I would always tell you to put 12 months of taxes and 12 months of insurance, so we're gonna add that money in right now. And you wanna use your pro forma taxes and pro forma insurance. You know, at closing, the lender's typically gonna require you to pay your year one insurance premium up front. And then they're also gonna escrow for taxes and insurance. The escrow is probably gonna be anywhere between 3 and 6 months for each. But it's always better to have more money than less. Last thing you wanna do is get to closing and, you know, not have enough money. Okay, so one thing here that's a big variable, and I don't know that I know the answer to this because I don't look in Tallahassee enough. Maybe Chris knows, but where are cap rates right now, Chris, for these types of assets? Do you have any idea?
Seeing around 6% is what I've been going with.
And that's for even for a nice quality asset like this.
That's typically for the C class, a C class property.
Okay. So what I would say is this would be a follow-up item too, if you're looking at this deal. I'm gonna put it at 5.5 right now, which will put our terminal cap at 6. And the reason I'm doing that is simply because it's a nicer asset. You know, there's a lot of money put into it. So I think you'll have a little bit different of a buyer pool and tenant base here. But confirm that if, you know, if it's something you're really looking at. So right now, at the lower end of the pricing guidance, this is where we are. Is anybody excited?